So I want to thank you all very much for joining us for our second panel session as part of this year's Photo Ethics Symposium on the theme of Ethics in the Age of AI, which is sponsored by Getty Images. This symposium aims to bring together a range of experts on AI and image making to focus on the ethical considerations of AI image generation. This panel is going to focus on AI images and public trust. It will be moderated by Dr. David Campbell. David is an educator with a varied history of research, writing, strategy, and management within academia, government, and nonprofit organizations. He works as the education director for the Seven Foundation, with responsibility for Seven Academy, Seven Insider, and Seven Community. David is an honorary professor in political science and international studies at the University of Queensland, Australia, and a visiting professor at the Northern Photography Centre at the University of Sunderland in the UK. He's an advisor to the Photography Ethics Centre. So David, I will hand it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Savannah, and thank you everyone for being here. I think we've got a really fascinating panel ahead of us. So let me just do a brief introduction for our three panelists who are going to speak in the order of Alex, Shirin, and then closing with Lynn. They're going to give about a 15-minute presentation each, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Alex is director of MediaWise, which is Pointer's digital media literacy project, teaching people of all ages how to spot misinformation online. He's responsible for program, curriculum development, research, and editorial content, which I think makes you pretty busy there, Alex. Shirin is an award-winning creative technologist, researcher, and artist based in New York, and she works with Witness as part of the Technology Threats and Opportunities program, investigating deepfakes, media manipulation, content authenticity, and cryptography practices in the space of human rights violations. And Lynn is the Assistant Director of Trusting News and also an Emmy Award-winning journalist who has worked both at the national level in the US and locally in California, Ohio, Texas, and Florida. A former ethics chair of the Society of Professional Journalists, and also a past national president of that organization. So we've got some highly qualified people to present and discuss on this topic. I think the overall theme for this panel, the title is about AI images and public trust, and what we're looking at is the relationship between the rise of generative AI and trust in authentic content and political processes. And for me, I think that raises some questions that we want to explore perhaps throughout the discussion. One is, what actually is trust? And where should we place trust? Should we place it in individuals, organizations, or processes? Another might be, how can we account for the wide range of AI tools that might be used in the practice of journalism and journalism processes, which covers everything from kind of spell check and Grammarly all the way through to text-to-image generation in generative AI models and so on. And then I think one of the most interesting things in this overall discussion, which I've seen on a number of panels in a number of other locations, is can we actually see a causal relationship between the use of generative AI and particular outcomes in society or in politics? Or at this stage, are we seeing a correlation? These things are happening alongside each other, but we're not sure about what the causal relationship is between these various elements. For me, I think some of those things are open for question and debate, and I think we're going to make some progress on that with the presentations today. So Alex, you're up first. Why don't you kick us off?
Sure thing. I will just go ahead and share my screen here and start my slideshow. Thank you so much, David, for the introduction. I'm incredibly happy to be here. Like you said, I've been very busy. We were very busy up to the election here in the US and somehow even more busy after. So looking forward to a little bit of a break. But I'm going to try to kick this off with kind of a level setting on where we're at with visual AI, how we're addressing the ethics of the creation, as well as the sourcing of AI images, and how misinformation has become absolutely intertwined with generative AI, because you are essentially creating something out of nothing, so to speak, obviously training data. But a little more about me. These images are not AI. I live in St. Pete, which is a very urban area, but I also am the father of 6 chickens, 2 dogs, and a horse named Magic Mike. So I'm very much an animal lover. And I've been at MediaWise, which is an organization aimed at teaching anyone to spot misinformation online. We're media literacy, but we are hyper focused on social platforms. When I started in 2019, we had something called the Teen Fact Checking Network, which we still have. We teach teenagers like this little guy named Ian here how to be their own fact checkers. They create videos, they create zines like you see here on the left. And the goal is, and which we have reached, is millions and millions of teenagers, older adults, Spanish speakers. We have programs in Bulgaria, in India, in Brazil, in Spain, essentially all over the world, teaching people how to spot misinformation. In 2019, when I first came to MediaWise and Pointer, the big buzz was about deep fakes. And there was this big deep fake that went around. It was a deep fake of Barack Obama calling Donald Trump a jackass. And it was all the rage. People thought the 2020 election would be the election of AI generated videos and images. And I used to teach it all the time. I would show this video to teens like Ian here and say, you got to watch out for this. And nothing came of that. It really did not. The technology was not there. 5 years later, I am completely done a 180. Generative AI is one of my main focuses. As you can see in this video here, we've embedded it in everything we teach. We recently launched a curriculum for middle and high schoolers, and understanding AI generated content is one of the core subjects that they're learning because teenagers are all using ChatGPT to create images right now. So it's become a major part of my life. It's become a major part of my teaching. And here's why. So I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a time when if you Googled Tank Man, who is the eponymous person who was involved in the Tiananmen Square, this image that is extremely recognizable from the event, and the top result was this image here, which is not an image from Tiananmen Square because people were not taking selfies during that time. They did not have cell phone cameras. But the top result, when you Googled about one of the most recognizable images in journalism in general, was an AI-generated image. And so this kind of, it really was a turning point for me because I was like, okay, this stuff is here to stay, and we're going to see it more and more places. Moving on to the curious case of Princess Kate, which you may recall from earlier this year. So CNN, I was actually at South by Southwest when this happened, and everyone was all abuzz because the first image of Princess Kate had surfaced. She had been away for a while. She had surgery, and many royal watchers and many people who I don't truly understand, I'm not a royal watcher, but were super interested in what she's up to. And this image dropped. CNN ran this image. Several news organizations ran this image, and everyone was like, Kate looks great. Here she is with her family. But we started looking closer at the image and realized it looks like there might be some extra buttons here and there, a weird zipper here and there, some weird little artifacts that led us to believe, and what many open source intelligence folks to believe, is that this is an AI-assisted image. So this image came out. There was a kill notice listed. CNN had to pull it down. Actually, I talked to the editor who approved this at CNN, and a lot of visual editors, they approve what goes online on their phone. So this person happened to be traveling, saw this image, approved it, and it ended up going totally viral. It had to be pulled down. The other thing that this kind of brought into view is not only the issue of trust in AI-generated images and the spread, was something called the liar's dividend. So the liar's dividend is the concept that with the threat of AI-generated images, it's going to be difficult to figure out what to trust. And so anyone can say, this video, that video of me is AI-generated, or I never said that, the AI did that. So we go back to Kate. So Kate posted a video of herself in a park explaining that she was sorry for creating the AI-assisted image, that she is going through a health scare. And it was a very heartfelt message. And immediately you had people all over the internet saying that is not a video of Princess Kate. It is a deep fake. She is dead. She may have been killed by one of the other royals. All of these wild conspiracy theories. And so this, to me, it was like not only we saw the rise of this AI generated image, but the attempt to, in a way, debunk it was itself turned into a conspiracy theory. And we started going down this liar's dividend path. So those are kind of like the big concepts that I've been thinking a lot about. So what about image sourcing? So image sourcing is something that really started to worry me when I started seeing news stories released about AI generated images of the war in Israel and Palestine that were being sourced out of Adobe and were running in not necessarily mainstream news stories, but they were running in news stories. They are AI generated image. They're downloaded from Adobe. People thinking, okay, this is real, and running it. And so this is a great news organization. I'm sorry I didn't put their name on this. Is Crikey in Australia. They broke this story earlier this year. And so I started doing research because I'm lucky to have a nice Adobe license here because we work at Pointer, we're journalists. So I started doing some research and found that while they were labeling some AI generated images, they also were still not labeling other AI generated images. So you could see in two different parts of the Adobe stock backend that I was going through, I saw one image that is exactly the same as another, and one was labeled AI, one was not labeled AI. And I'll tell you what, it's hard to see that something has been labeled AI. Look how small it is. You know, I'm excited to hear Lynn talk about labeling and disclosures because that is a huge part of trust too, is how are we telling people that these are labeled with AI? So this was a really confusing time. It was a time when we were seeing trust in news already at its lowest, and the injection of generative AI, these images that are created out of these training data sets, synthetic images, is just further degrading that trust. But probably one of the most alarming things that we've seen and the most threatening things that Shirin, your organization Witness has done so much work in studying is the rise of threatening of deepfake pornography. So Taylor Swift was the target of AI generated images that were incredibly inappropriate. They spread, of course, on X, the social platform that is lots and lots of problems. So this was when it happened to Taylor, that was a huge moving situation because people started to realize that these problems go beyond just politics. These problems go beyond just trust in news. These problems, the problem with generative AI images is now a threat to women everywhere, and who, you know, especially think about female journalists are under threat all the time. So this is just all of the laying out kind of the problems with generative AI and what we've seen in our research so far. You may be familiar. So Adobe, actually, going back to Adobe is actually leading the charge on the idea of content credentials. So they and several other large tech firms and civil organizations have come together and tried to map out how to label images invisibly so everyone knows where they came from, their provenance, were they real, were they fake. So this is still, it's been going on for a while, but it's still in its initial stages. But the idea is every camera would take an image, and that image would contain these C2PA content credentials, and then they could be verified. We might get into the discussion on whether content credentials can actually work, but this is something that is being worked on to address that problem. So I'll wrap, my big talk here. We're talking a little bit about AI for good. So I come from the media literacy and misinformation research side of things. So I always approached AI from the negative side of things and the helping people navigate and suss out AI generated content. But as we've seen news organizations and companies all over the world, there was an ad for a beer that they used AI to, I don't know, do something of. We put the AI in IPA. So every organization in the world is trying to do things with AI right now. So at Pointer, we're also trying to address, how can you use AI for good? So here's an example I will just show you.
नमस्ते, हरी श्रीनिवासन हूँ, पीपीएस न्यूज आवर वीकेंड का एंकर। मैं अमानपुर कार्यक्रम और टेक ऑन फेक यू।
So that is a PBS NewsHour co-anchor and journalist named Hari Srinivasan. He is an ambassador of MediaWise, very trusted voice. He's created lots and lots of videos about how to debunk fake news, and he's done that in the U.S. because he does not generally do broadcasts in Hindi. That broadcast was in Hindi, and that broadcast was created with AI, a program called HeyGen. So in thinking about this, now he's the one who he volunteered for this, so don't worry about that. But he has been very promotional in trying to figure out how we can use AI to reach more people. So this is kind of an example of using AI to reach more people. So Pointer has been super invested in figuring out how to use AI ethically. And we've come up with these pillars of ethical AI use. So they center around transparency, which Lynn will discuss more in depth. Accuracy and human oversight, making sure there's always a human involved in the beginning, middle, and end of the generation of AI content. Audience service. Our audiences in India demanding media literacy content that we can provide with AI. Privacy and security. Everything you put into an AI program may end up in the public sphere. So are we being very protective of our data? Accountability. Are we holding people accountable to use these tools ethically? And with all of those pillars in mind, are we exploring things? So I will close very quick because visual AI is something that is understudied on the ethics side. And it's something that we are not comfortable with using beyond data visualizations, illustrations. I have a colleague who uses AI-generated illustrations for slides during workshops. And then there are lots of people who are using infographics for social media, but that right now is really about it. And that is because the training data for a lot of these is many times opaque on whether it is off of licensed and copyrighted material, and the idea of displacing folks who do this for a living. So I'll wrap there. I covered a lot, but I will encourage you, if you are interested in learning more, you can take your phone and shoot this QR code. We have a very robust report on everything we've done with ethics at Pointer.
Alex, thank you very much. That's great. Shirin, if you want to bring up your slides and get ready. While you're doing that, Alex, kind of a question for you. I was interested, you draw a distinction between kind of AI-assisted imagery and AI-generated imagery. And I think this is one of the complex spaces to think through, because depending how we define AI, which has now become this umbrella term for so much, almost any photographer who is using Photoshop, for example, is using an AI-assisted technology because of the way things are built into Photoshop or Lightroom or an equivalent editing program. How are you thinking through, you got to a list of permissible things, but how are you trying to think through those two different things of AI-assisted versus AI-generated?
Yeah, and that's and Lynn will talk about this in the specificity of disclosures when using these tools, because AI means 100 different things to 100 different people. So when I say AI assisted, I'm trying to be very specific about generative AI assisted. So if you are removing someone from a photograph, that is a massive ethical violation. If you are removing an arm or something like that. So it's about how substantial the editing of a photo is, which you could have done in Photoshop, years ago. But now that anyone can do it, I think it's kind of put the necessity of like very robust and global ethics guidelines. And I've said this before, what you just mentioned, kind of like the generative AI assisted tools are actually more dangerous than Gen AI, like whole hog, because doing small edits to images can really change the meaning and the context and fool a lot of people because it's a real image that's slightly changed.
Yeah, great. We'll pick up more of that later. Shirin, over to you.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Alex, for this presentation. I think we're going to cover many similar topics, so maybe you made my job easier by not running over time. So thank you for that too. So I'm with Witness, and just to introduce it, Witness is a global human rights organization. We sit on 5 continents, Asia Pacific, MENA, Middle East, North Africa, Africa, Latin America, US, and sometimes we also work in Europe, depending on situations like Ukraine. Our mission is how we can help human rights defenders, journalists, community leaders to use video and emerging technologies to protect and defend human rights. And we really care about how we can assist with doing that in a trustworthy way that can be used for evidence later in court and to find people accountable and so on. The way we do it is we are a grassroots organization, but we also sit in a system level, and we are developing guidelines, trainings, working with the communities themselves, developing reports, and really also developing projects that are doing hands-on work. These are some of the resources we are keep developing, and a link to our really website that really focus on our synthetic media. Since 2018, we started to really focus on what it will mean, synthetic media, AI, audiovisual AI, generative AI, and what will be the impact on trust if people cannot believe what they see for human rights evidence, and so on. So that's something we started to focus on, and we're doing that this year. We really zoomed in on global election. It was we didn't do much work around the US election, but we did a lot in other regions, and we also started to look in the impact on conflict and state violence around the use of AI. What does it mean in that context? I just wanted to ground our conversation, or this like really short presentation, that AI present a very familiar risk, right? We know that from shallow fakes and other types of manipulation, but it's go way beyond, like since the moment media was invented, visual media was invented, manipulation started, right? It's something that we always had. So that's not something that AI is just like introduced us. There is it is amplifying risk, and it is introducing a new risk, but we did see it in those famous example on the screen from Stalin that used to remove people he didn't want to physically or from images, but also from example like Mummler that used to do double exposure to kind of like create this feel of like ghost is visiting you from the afterlife, right? So we saw that, and Mummler even was tried to be charged in trial. He was not found guilty for how he kind of like tried to fraud people that were in grave. But again, it's not a new concept. What we do see is how AI become very accessible, very commercial. The ease of use from a web application, phone application, or APIs, the volume, the variation that you can do, the multimodality, how it's easy to combine different models together, from voice clone to video, to develop a really sophisticated deepfake, to personalization, to really target specific people with like voice clone again, let's say, and really create a specific content that might confuse people when it find them on different platforms, like landlines, for example, which is a different audience, and it's a very confusing. And real-time interactivity, which we see is developing pretty fast, and that means like how we interacting with those AI. It's not just a recording of a voice call, it's a conversation that can happen, and that's really impact the way we are engaging with the content, believing the content, and so on. And from those types of key shift, we see emerging risks. For example, it's easier for malicious actor to create and spread high quality manipulative information at scale and volume that we are not prepared yet, with more personalization. And I'm saying more, we are not prepared yet. It's technology we are not prepared yet. Detection is not there, provenance is not there, but also human are not capable to do that themselves, right? So it's where is the burden really sits? It's still not really been established, the accountability aspect that Alex mentioned. And AI content is potentially undermining, and I'm saying potentially because it's an under-researched area, but we do know it's undermining trust in the authentic content. People just don't believe what they see anymore, which that's the main impact that we see and witness around AI content. We see not as many deepfake, but a lot of distrust in content. And platforms are not effectively able to detect and therefore to moderate content online at the scale that is happening. So I will go very fast on those examples because we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to mention the way how we currently see AI is being used and what we saw in the last couple of years. I'm just trying to, the bar of the Zoom is on, yeah, is blocking my screen. So it's kind of like, it's going back to what Alex just mentioned about positive uses, right? So it's not necessarily malicious uses of AI, but AI is being used to communicate. So we see an early example for 2020 where a politician from India used AI to kind of like translate his message to different dialect in English, for example. Problem was he did not disclose it. So here we are entering a different element of what is the transparency aspect and how we communicate that. But it did reach a different types of community and it did want to communicate with different areas in India, the multi-state and multi-language. But we also saw an example from this year, which was pretty interesting from Pakistan, where a candidate declared victory from jail. So the way he did it, he wrote, or his people wrote the statement, but it was a voice clone that's really used to share it with the public. We see AI to campaign. We saw a lot of that in this in this year of election. We saw good examples, maybe good, I will say positive, more like creative examples that it's pretty clear that it's being used for artistic exploration from Argentina. And on the other side, we see examples of candidate meeting farmers or kids. He did not meet those farmers, he did not meet those kids, but and he did not disclose that it's an AI generated, but he presented himself as a man that meet the people where they are, right? So what image he created without really actually doing it. In other areas of campaigning, we see a lot around climate change and what the future, the dystopian future that can happen for climate, but also earlier in 2023, if Biden will win the election, what the dystopian future that is hold for us. We see also AI for satire, which we did a lot of work in witness around how we can protect satire, which is such an important area for human rights and freedom of expression when you punch from bottom up and kind of undermine people in power or expose dynamic of powers. So we see a lot of that, and that's a really area that has a lot of rich examples. And we see AI in propaganda, going back to examples that Alex shared that were spread online, but also deepfake of Zelensky calling to surrender, which was the early days of the war in Ukraine. But we're also seeing a voice cloning that comes from Sudan in the civil war, which is so much more complicated from the case of Zelensky, for example, which he is his online presence is so robust. He is very comfortable communicating online, so he debunked it pretty fast. He also prepared the public for the threats of deepfake very well. So it was a very successful, quote unquote, case of deepfake versus voice cloning, which is so hard. Audio is really, really complicated to detect for so many reasons, for background noise, for cross-talking, people talking over each other, or you really need to know the specific nuance of that person, how he speaks, where he pause, how he breathe, versus if you see a glitch, a visual glitch, which is very different. So the spread of audio, we see a lot, and we find it a big challenge currently for our local communities. We see AI to shape frames and also context shift. So frames of deepfake of Biden really emphasizing age-related mistakes, right? So really shaping the narratives around that. But from the left, we see Black supporters supporting Trump, which was used to illustrate. So like Alex said, that's some uses that are being in the back for slides, for whatever, it's was the reason for generating those images, but those were leaked and then they were distributed online, and it was not labeled as well. So it's an interesting example from that. We saw AI to deceive voter candidate, deepfake of candidate declaring that they are withdrawing or calling voters not to vote. And again, I'm showing all those examples. Sorry, I have a dog here. I'm showing all those examples just to also show how the global outreach of deepfake is, right? So it's like, if you see all those countries, it's like, it's not a specific region that is being impacted. We see targeting women, which is, Alex touched on that, but that's the main area that we see currently deepfake and non-consensual deepfake imageries. It's also impacting in from a local level to politician, and it's impacting the democracy space in that sense as well. AI to influence operation, we see AI avatars that are pretending to be a news host and sharing statements of government, supporting government or supporting coups. And we see AI as an excuse, like a get out ticket, get out of jail ticket, right? Oh, I did not say what you are hearing now. This is an AI, and proving something did happen has so much more challenges than like proving it's fake. And Alex also touched on that, how we didn't see a lot of AI also ahead of this election, but we did see the lack of the impact on trust that happened, and how this is a great report from the ISD that really showing how the conversation online were in the billions, of numbers of billions happening online, really calling authentic content fake content, and the discussion around that. So I'm rushing, but I hope that's okay. But so in Witness, we're really looking at two main mitigation approaches for those types of cases: how we're protecting the real and how we're identifying the fake. So protecting the real, I mean by Witness is doing a lot of work. We are co-chairing the harm and threat assessments of the C2PA, the Content for Coalition. Really trying to be part of the standard development that happens in the field around the provenance, the metadata that is being attached to the content, and how we are making sure it's being developed with human rights framework. So really thinking about privacy, accessibility, transparency, and all those elements that need to be implemented from the start when we're developing those types of standards. And from the other side, how we identify the fake. So we are still not have this standards being not implemented, and we also have a lot of gray areas around open source and other types of content that will not have that types of metadata attached. So how are we really investing in detection technology and really understanding that? There is a huge detection equity gap that exists. The online detection tools that are misleading, are not accurate, are not transparent. It's really hard to understand the result. They are not supporting journalistic pipeline for really evidence-based, detail-based type of results. And so we are doing a lot of work around trying to bridge the gap. It's not scalable as a solution that can be sustainable, but it is something that we are doing, connecting journalists, fact checkers on a local level to leading media forensic and deepfake experts. We started with IFCN, they didn't have fact checkers network, but we really created a lot of direct collaboration globally. And we are currently working on a framework to really evaluate what does it mean to develop equitable effectiveness of AI detection tools. So the sixth consideration we are looking is how they can be connected to real life challenge. So like I said, with voice cloning, audio, suspected AI audio, where the low resolution, the noisiness, the background music confuse detection. So how detection can be really take into consideration real life challenge, and when it cannot expect the unexpected, how is it facilitating that scenarios? How they can be more transparent and explainability, what type of information should be shared, how they are accessible, what does it mean, element of accessibility around language detection that not working in different languages, how are we communicating that, and really understand who is the public we are developing tools for, fairness of development, fairness of data set, training sets, biases, durability, how you develop tools that can be adjusted to the fast pace of generative technology, and how you contextualize that to other skills of OSINT and understand that it's only part of the verification. It's not the result. It's not the solution. I will finish with a few shifts that we're seeing. So just to recap, there is a broad AI transparency mandate standards development that are happening, which are showing happening a lot in the EU AI Act space, US policy space, and there is a lot of like challenges that still exist in the detection. I touched on all of those. It's just a recap, and I don't want to go much over time. But those are just some questions that we are still struggling and trying to understand the meaning for when we see all those like trends and continue to be hyper-realizing, hyper-personalized content. What does it mean for us? Thank you.
Fantastic, Shirin. That's great. I mean, you've provided this really incredible overview showing kind of the global scope and global scale of how generative AI is already being used by these political actors and so on. But you also wisely, in italics, put, potentially having an impact, and said it was a little bit under-researched in those areas. Is there any research showing an actual impact in the political context of the use of generative AI changing votes, changing the outcome of an election, or having a demonstrable political impact? Or are we still talking about it as a potential?
That's a great question. I think assessment impact is always very challenging, right? How you are really have the right tool to evaluate the pre-post that happen and post-post that happen, and like the situation, who is the audience that it's reaching, what their education level, right? There is so many levels to impact assessments. So I think this is still missing, because it's still like we so sparse of all those type of examples. It's not like what we did see, what I mentioned with the ISCD report, is just the lack of trust, that people just claim everything is AI because they know it exists, and that we're just not well equipped to really understand how to. We don't well equipped. Again, it's not us. It's the infrastructure is not well equipped to really share with us that information that is needed.
Yeah, perfect. Great. We'll pick up on some more of that later. And speaking of trust, let's hand over to Lynn.
Yes, hello, let me share my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Walsh, the Assistant Director at Trusting News. And at Trusting News, what we do is, first and foremost, we are trying to help journalists rebuild trust with their audience. Primarily, the starting point for this work is to first learn and understand, and help journalists learn and understand, how people in their communities decide what news to trust and what their feelings are about news and about journalism. And the reason that I kind of focus on that is because what I'm going to be sharing today is kind of more of that user community focused understanding of what people think of AI, and then also how journalists should respond to those thoughts about AI and how that can be used to build trust. I also will share links to these slides and then some of the resources that I'm going to kind of point at after I'm done here. And I'm always glad to answer any questions. So first and foremost, just a broad kind of overview. What do people think of AI? These are some data points that is pulled from other research that's been done at Pointer, research we have done, research that Ipsos has done with the BBC, Reuters. And so this is global research. And then I'm also going to share a little bit about what we have done here in the US with 10 newsrooms. But generally speaking, there is widespread awareness of AI. Mostly ChatGPT is one of the most commonly known generative AI tools. Younger audiences tend to have used it more when this research has been done. Things to think about when it comes to the journalistic use of AI. Most people already think that journalists are using it. We also know that people tend to have more comfort level with AI being used if there's more human involvement. So the more likely that a human was involved in the process, in even though AI was used. So if you used AI as a journalist, but you still fact checked it, you looked at it, you made sure it was accurate, it met your ethical standards, that's something that people want to know and they're more comfortable with it. We also know, again, generally speaking, people tend to be more comfortable with AI being used with text than compared to images or video, and with lighter content. So more kind of the sports content, entertainment versus political content. Now, people have generally a lot of concerns about AI. So one thing to keep in mind, and that the studies and research have kind of found, is that a lot of people's understanding of AI actually comes from pop culture. So they think of something like the Terminator. They're kind of thinking of these science fiction type situations, and they have a negative feeling almost instantly if you ask them. They also are very concerned that journalists specifically will use it irresponsibly. They have questions about whether or not, if journalists are using it, is using generative AI cheating. And then there are large concerns around the potential for this to lead to misinformation and job loss within the industry, which is interesting, but also that leading to misinformation, basically the difficulty that they will have as a user being able to decipher what is real and what is fake. And then people generally do want disclosures and transparency, which is what I will talk a little bit more about. So when you think about, this is what people think about AI. And again, I think this is going to change as more people use AI, as we get more comfortable with generative AI, as it becomes potentially, and I think it will, a part of our world more. I think this is going to change, but this is where we are right now. And I want to say that because I think that's important to understand when it comes to trust and when it comes to news consumption. We need to really think about the news consumer and where they are now. We can change what we do later, but right now people tend to have a discomfort level with AI. They have a lot more questions. There are a lot of concerns about it. And so how that compares to news. So now you have something that people are uncomfortable with. They're not really sure how it operates. They have a lot of questions. They're hesitant about it, right? Now, if we're saying, hey, we're going to use this in our news content, we're going to use that to create news, to create images, to edit images, to help show something in a video, right? So if we're saying that, we have to also understand, well, people have that discomfort level. And in general, people don't trust news content overall, pretty much. I mean, there are differences, obviously, depending on where you live and depending on age, political affiliation. But generally speaking, trust in news is low. So if trust is already low, we're now adding this other tool that people tend to have more negative feelings than positive feelings. What we are concerned about at Trusting News is that this is only going to negatively impact trust levels in news content, in information, if we don't do something about it to kind of have a better understanding about how can we use this tool that we think in the industry can maybe help us better serve our audiences, but use it in a way to not lose trust and potentially build trust. So that's what we're trying to do. And the reason I kind of do share those two facts of, okay, here's what people think of AI, here's what people think of news, is because I think when they collide, there's potential for it to lead to much lower levels of trust in news. And we don't want to see that happen. And so the question then in Trusting News, we like to really live in the space of solutions because it can be really depressing to live in the space of where some of the research points as far as what people think of news and information. But we really try to find solutions. And so we really want to help journalists who are responsible, ethical, mission driven come up with solutions and ways to rebuild trust. And then specifically with AI, how can we not at least lose trust and have better conversations with our audience? And I really do think use this as a way to build relationships or rebuild relationships. And so, primarily, when we look at this work broadly, when it comes to building trust with news consumers, when we talk to journalists, when we talk to newsrooms, we talk about mainly two areas: it's transparency and it's engagement. So, transparency means that you are talking about how you do your job, what your mission is, what your goals are. Why did you choose to do this story? How did you fact check? Do you know the source of the information, where this is coming from? There are so many things that people don't understand or know about how news works that leads to distrust. Basically, what happens is people are making an assumption about how you did your job. That assumption is generally negative, and that's leading them to think that you have a bias or you have an agenda. So they may think that that photo you're sharing or that photo that you actually took because you were there, they may not think that that's the case, right? And so we need to be more transparent about process, how we do things, why we do things, to help kind of fill that information void. That's the idea behind that transparency. And then the other element here is the engagement. So we need to better serve as journalists, better serve our audiences with content that is useful, that is helpful, that is stuff that they will understand. And a lot of times we're not necessarily doing that. And it's because we're not engaging with them. We're not asking them, what problems are you seeing in your neighborhood? What things could we help you with? When it comes to political news, we often write stories for kind of political news junkies, right? The people who follow every single breaking news update. Well, if we write content, produce content for that, then we are not allowing people who are just kind of sometimes following along to participate. We're not providing an on ramp. So when we work with newsrooms, we work on transparency, how to be transparent, how to talk about what you do, why you do it, and insert that into daily stories, which I'm going to talk about. And then also that engagement, understanding and engaging with the community, listening to them, having empathy for what it's like to be a news consumer. It's frustrating, it's overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there. And so the question now is, first and foremost, why transparency, which is what I'm going to focus on today, and then how to apply that to AI. Well, at Trusting News, what we do with everything is we will look at research that's been done either by others or by ourselves, and we think, okay, how could we solve this problem? If people are saying they don't trust news because of X, is there a possible solution? We come up with a potential idea, and then we test it. We test that by working with newsrooms directly and having them experiment with our ideas. And so with transparency, we've done this over and over again. And what we know is that when journalists are transparent about what they do, what their goals are, how they did something, we know that this can work to rebuild trust. And I'm sharing this because we believe that this same thing can apply to disclosures in AI. And so the kind of example with the data and research about why transparency works, we know that if journalists add explain your process boxes, I've heard them called info boxes, nerd boxes, all sorts of different things. Basically, this is information inside a story that's talking about why you did this story, how you did this story, why you talked to those specific sources, if you used an anonymous source, what that means, how you work to be fair, all sorts of different things that you can answer. When newsrooms do this, it is something that can build trust. We did some A/B testing with multiple different newsrooms, and we found that people who saw the story with this box were more likely to say that the story was informative. They were more likely to trust the information. They were more likely to find it credible, that it had integrity, that it was fair, that it was transparent, reliable, accurate, unbiased, and told the whole story. So we know transparency can work. The good news is, especially in visual medium, we know this works on air as well, whether that's in radio and audio or television and video. We've done some research where we added trust language to the intros of TV news stories and to the tags of TV news stories. And we did focus groups, and people overwhelmingly said that they liked the story version that had the intros and the tags that had that trust language that said, here's why we did this story. Here's what we hope you get out of this story. So here's how we verified our information. Adding that kind of information in print, on social media, in newsletters, on podcasts, radio, and TV, it all works to build trust. So now the question is, how can we take those learnings and apply this to AI? So what we did at Trusting News over the summer, we worked with 10 newsrooms, 10 US newsrooms, and we had them survey their audiences. So this is kind of part of that engagement component, right? We had them survey their audience with a 15 to 20 question survey, asking them questions about their comfort level with journalists' use of AI, what they want to see when journalists do use AI. Do they want disclosure? When do they want disclosure? How do they want disclosure? How much do they want disclosed? So we had them do that survey. We got about 6,000 responses. from those news consumers of those 10 newsrooms. We also had them conduct one-on-one interviews with 10 of their own news consumers. And I will share information about that engagement. And if you would want to duplicate that, we have it available for you, a copy of the survey and a copy of the interview guide. But the outcome, which is what I want to talk about now for the rest of this time, is that overwhelmingly, people want journalists to disclose their use of AI. This is something that other research has pointed to, but this is something that our research definitely showed. People said, we want to know if you're using AI. But they don't just want to know if AI was used. They also, though, said that they want to know why. Why did journalists decide to use AI? They said that this would be important. 87% of people said, yes, we would want to know, like, why did you decide to use AI in this instance? They also said that understanding how journalists will be ethical or accurate with the use of AI would be important. So again, this goes back to kind of that, okay, so you're telling us you used AI. Yes, we want to know. We want to know why. Why, in this case, did you decide to use AI to generate an image? Like, why was that necessary? And they want to know, how did you still make sure that this was ethical and accurate and met your ethical standards, your reporting standards that you have? And if you had a human review the image, review anything about the video, review anything about the text before you published it, please tell us. That also is something that would be important. So we have also learned since this research that overall, people want disclosures. So the question is, how do you disclose AI and answer all of these questions in a way that's not going to like overwhelm the audience? That's kind of questions that we're still exploring. But based on this research, we believe that you can write an AI disclosure on content that you have used AI with that is going to include what your AI tool did, an explanation about why AI was used, ideally with language that shows how AI benefited the community or improved your news coverage. So something we know in general about transparency language is when journalists just say, hey, we worked really hard to get these public records, or this information came from public records. That's transparency, but it's not necessarily transparency language that helps build trust. What would help build trust is that saying something like, we worked hard to get the public records that belong to you, to get your information. We worked hard to get access to the information that you have the rights to, right? So you're kind of tying it to how it's going to benefit the community, not tie to the community. So when you're talking about what should AI disclosures include, so what the AI tool did, why it was used, and ideally that language of how AI benefits community improves news coverage. If a human was involved, mentioning that, and how you made sure that it still met your ethical editorial standards in your newsroom. So you think, okay, that sounds like a lot. How do you do that? What does that look like? We have developed a Mad Lib style kind of fill in the blank couple sentence disclosure that we suggest that newsrooms use, and we are actually going to be testing further at the beginning of the year. But basically, it looks like this. In the story we used, you could either say you just used AI, you could say that you could name the specific tool you used or a description of what the tool did, and say, to help us, what did it help you do? What did it do for you? When using that tool, how did you fact check it? How did you make sure that it met your ethical standard? How did you make sure it was still accurate? And then adding a sentence that says, using this allowed us to, what is it allowing you to do? To do more stories, to do more local stories, to go more in depth, to provide content on more platforms, whatever that might be. And so here's just a couple examples of what that could look like. So with the transcription, let's say you use AI to transcribe audio interviews in your story. So in this story, we used artificial intelligence to transcribe the audio from our interviews with sources. We reviewed all quotes for accuracy by listening to the original audio of the interviews before including them in the story. Using AI made the reporting process more efficient, giving us more time to fact check the story for accuracy and fairness. So this would be a suggestion that we would say, according to what people say they want information about all these things. So add this to the top of a story. Include this when you are maybe talking on air. Another example when it comes to analyzing data in records. In this investigative story, we used artificial intelligence to assist in the analysis of the public records received from the state. The reporters fact-checked the information used in the story by re-reviewing the public records by hand. So very specific. Requesting public records to get beyond the he said, she said is an important part of our reporting process. And AI allowed us to do this more quickly. So these are examples. We have on our website several more examples of this. And again, you could take this and write it many, many different ways. In a couple of weeks, we are going to publish an update to to this research where we actually found that, and kind of a preview here, where we actually found that the exact language that you use actually doesn't appear to seem to matter that much. What does matter, though, is that you are specific about what you did, in not general, just saying we used AI in this story. We found in the pilot research that if you just say something like we used AI in the story, that's actually not something, or it's not a disclosure that's going to necessarily help build trust or lead people to have a high comfort level with your use of AI. Versus if you say, in the story, we used AI to transcribe interviews, we went back and listened to those. That is something that people said it didn't decrease trust, and it's something that they were more comfortable with when it came to that use of AI. So we'll be publishing something about that in a couple of weeks. But all of this to say, more specific is better. And in general, people said they do want disclosures and they want to know a little more information about what this is, about how you used it and why. The other big takeaway, and I want to talk about this just for a couple minutes, and hopefully there are some questions about this. When the newsrooms were asking their audiences this survey and then doing those one-on-one interviews, what we found is that people overwhelmingly said that they want to know more about understanding AI in general, how to detect it, what it is, how it's being used. There is just they're interested in being educated on generative AI, but just AI in general, not just in news, how it's being used in your newsroom, but how it's being used around them, how they can detect it in the information space. The other sort of surprising thing to me was that they said, yes, we would welcome journalists telling us about this. And why that surprised me is because trust in news is so low, but yet they are saying, yes, journalists, help us understand this. We want to we want to understand this, and we would welcome any kind of media literacy coming from you. And so for us, we're looking at this and saying, wow, this is an opportunity to really engage with audiences and have conversations with audiences to build trust, to talk with them, help them understand something. And so we really want to explore this more and work with newsrooms to see, like, what could that look like? Is it hosting workshops? Is it hosting webinars? Is it doing Q&As about how AI works? Maybe even posting videos about, like, hey, let me show you how I used AI to create this image or recreate this scene, right? I think those explainers could go a long way, and there's a lot of opportunity there to potentially build trust. So we want to do more exploring there, but a huge takeaway for us, and I think an opportunity for journalists there. So all of this information, if you want to duplicate this and understand how your audience feels about AI, and learn more about what they want or their comfort level with it, that community survey is in this trust kit. There's also more transparency language suggestions there as well. And then we also have a weekly newsletter where we talk about other things about trust, but also we are focusing a lot on AI. So I'm going to stop sharing, stop there, and share these links in the chat, and then glad to answer any questions.
David, you're muted.
I had to be the first one to be muted, right? How do you want to handle questions? Do you want to handle them? Do you want to call them in the chats? Do you want me to do that? Also, if someone just wants to raise their hand and actually speak on screen, very welcome to do so.
I would like to, but I can't see the digital hand raising thing, so you're getting it verbally.
Well, perfect. You've appeared. All good, Julia. What's your question?
I have a few actually. The first one is really for Lynn. I really like the explain your process. I was madly typing notes here because it's very useful for me as a photographer as well as for anything that's written. But I wondered if you've got any recommendations for photography, because, for example, at the moment, Adobe, having reacted to accusations about lack of transparency, have reacted by now automatically putting into the metadata that images have been, I can't remember the exact labeling, but basically it's been assisted by AI, even when it's just a little clone, or if you know, very often with buildings, we want to make them upright. And then if you need to keep to the same proportion, because otherwise you might lose the important bit of the image, you just fill the edges in. We used to do it using clone tools. Now we use it doing generative AI. But it's very misleading to have that labeled as AI when it's literally just putting a little bit of dirt or building on the side to make something upright, as opposed to taking out or adding a human. I wonder if people in general have got thoughts on how we navigate this. Yeah, that's my first and most burning question.
Yeah, I'll kind of weigh in here, and I'm sure others have lots of thoughts here too. I mean, so from what the research we have done and just looking at other research that others have done, personally, you know, and I look at it at how is the user going to respond to this? And while I do think that we might get to a point where having just a general AI label might be sufficient. We might get to a point because people understand AI so much, they understand what it means. That might be something that is useful. Personally, I don't know that that is something that is useful. A general label is something that is useful now. I say that because people might see that, and to your point, think, oh my gosh, like, did they add a building to it? Does that make sense? Like, they don't necessarily have an understanding of, okay, if AI was used, what that means. Was it
Exactly.
just to your point, right? Was it just to your point to kind of straighten something? Was it to maybe fix lighting a little bit? I mean, the range is so great. And just in general, what we know about people when it comes to trusting news content, this goes to images and video as well, not just text. People are generally going to not give you the benefit of the doubt and probably make an assumption that is negative. So they're not going to think that you used AI to just straighten the building. Probably, most likely. They're going to probably assume or have questions about, wow, was something added here? Is this actually what is happening? And so that's what we are finding is that right now, anyways, for most news consumers and most people consuming content, the more specific you can get, the better. Now, I know that doesn't help as we are as an industry trying to come up with a way to kind of make this easy, right? And when we talk about provenance. And so I think that's to be debated. I think right now it's not enough because the education level isn't there on the consumer level.
I agree. And I think it's something that needs to be raised with organizations like Adobe, because it's backfiring already. People are immediately figuring out how to avoid doing it. And I mean, there are ways to undo it because it gives completely the wrong impression.
Yeah, and I just want to say that does not mean I'm against kind of the provenance and this idea, but I just think there's more that needs to be done, at least at this point, from when we think about it from the consumer perspective.
Yeah.
Alex, Shirin, did you want to weigh in on any of that?
Yeah, no, you covered it very well. I think this kind of fits into the idea of label fatigue too. This is something that we are going to be fighting against, is the fact that one, for people, some of the people we talk to here at Pointer, if they see AI in the label, it doesn't matter how, specific it can get. They're just immediately like, they just throw their hands up. People are getting sick of even seeing labels for anything on news stories. The idea of label fatigue. So what you brought up specifically is something I've been thinking a lot about, is the idea of content credentials, because it's so easy to get around metadata. You know this very well. All you have to do is screenshot an image, and that completely strips it of everything. I mean, if I post an image in Slack, people can't figure out when I took it or, where I took it, because the metadata is stripped, and it's for privacy, obviously. So, the main thing is like I think we need to do more research, like what Lynn and Trusting News is doing, what Pointer is doing, and designers need to be in on this as well. I think this is a problem that is at the intersection of so many different parts of organizations, that this is just like the advent of social media, where we are rushing to regulate, we are rushing to figure out how to identify, how to label. We are in this like mad rush that we're not thinking about small things. Like a designer may have a completely different view of what that label should look like on an image, a watermark might look like. Somebody who studies data privacy for a living might have a different way of thinking about how to label metadata. So this is, I think it's a situation where we're kind of caught between trying to build the plane as it's flying, while at the same time make sure we're building it correctly so it has actually some longevity. And the other thing I'll bring up too is a lot of AI product people will tell me, okay, so if I use Google Maps, do I have to say I used AI? Or if I used, Microsoft Word, do I? So I think there's so many questions that we have to consider. And I mean, in a year, maybe there is a very specific label. In 5 years, there might not be a label, because AI will be so embedded in every single thing that we do. So it's just super, super complex. Really good question.
Julia, we may come back to you in a second. Other questions? Other people want to either post a question in chat or ask one live? Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Andrew from Brewster, New York. I have a question around photography being scrubbed by AI tools and content used to teach AI. So I work for a large humanitarian nonprofit and refugee resettlement agency. And so we have lots of photo and video stories about the people we serve. And we are really just beginning to contend with how we can avoid AI kind of scrubbing all of the images of our clients, but also realizing that as soon as it's published, anything can scrub it. And so I'm just really curious to just like kind of poll everyone here. What precautions do you think an organization like ours could take to protect our client images, or just have like AI exploit it the least amount possible?
By scrubbing, you mean scraping them into training models? Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Alex, Shirin, thoughts?
I don't have answers, but I think that's a really great question. I think many people are struggling with that currently, and I do think we need regulation to rush in that sense, because copyright and protection of data is very, very important. There are a lot of like independent groups that are working, and mostly artist-led independent group that are working on inserting kind of like a metadata that prevent from scrapping, or developing ethical open data for training. So there are different types of approaches. There are also technical advancements that are starting to appear. They're still not robust, and they're still not implemented in order to really be detected before scrubbing for training. But for example, like invisible watermarks that can communicate not to scrape something, for example. But again, it should be like a infrastructure and not just a specific tool that is being developed. So it's a big struggle. It's a question of what happens to our data, right? What happens to ourselves? How are we protecting ourselves? A lot of questions that were asked many years now, our right to be deleted, our right to, right? Yeah, still not answered there.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very difficult one because you can add the robots.txt to your blog or your page where that is allegedly stops the scrapers from coming. It might stop Google and maybe some nicer AI organizations, but OpenAI has been busted scraping pages that have been protected from scraping. The idea of, I mean, even a year ago, I remember talking to a data guy who was poisoning all of his images. So basically like inserting that watermark to ruin the training data when they actually try to start training it. So booby trapping images. I've never heard of Glaze. I saw someone put that in the chat. So there are tools out there, you know, Shirin mentioned tools that can try to add invisible watermarks, but you know, I mean, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, I think of so Blue Sky. I don't know if anyone here is on Blue Sky, social media platform. It is an open protocol, like it's an open website, and somebody uploaded, you know, millions and millions of posts from it, so researchers could use it, and technically you could use that to train AI models. And for me, I'm in kind of an interesting position as a data journalist. I'm in a way pro scraping because it's created a lot of the great investigative journalism, and that's what X took away. But at the same time, I am also an advocate for privacy and protecting people's digital rights. So this is just this push and pull between data privacy and new technology is incredibly fraught. And you know what news organizations are trying to do is come together and I don't know if your organization, I'm a nonprofit, we can't afford to do this, but filing litigation. If you sue OpenAI, they will stop scraping your stuff because they are afraid. And if you try to use ChatGPT to find New York Times stories, it's very difficult because New York Times is suing them. So filing litigation, it might be coming together with multiple organizations like yours and coming together and saying, can we pool our resources and send a letter to OpenAI or some of the other organizations like this. So strength in numbers is a big thing with scraping, but it's difficult to navigate.
Yeah. Lynn, I'm wondering whether the newsrooms that you've worked with and surveyed, whether they've expressed attitudes towards their material being scraped. Do they like the New York Times and taking lawsuits against OpenAI and other companies, or are there different attitudes?
You know, so we primarily work with a lot of local, like smaller local newsrooms in the US. And I think this is where, you know, it's as Alex talks about kind of force and the strength in numbers. I think that's absolutely true. And I think you see some of the bigger news organizations taking a stand against this, which I think potentially is good for the industry. What happens sometimes is these smaller news organizations get left behind, if that makes sense, because they don't necessarily have people to act on their behalf and or to do this work. And so we have heard from some of the local newsrooms that yes, this is something that they are working on and trying to act on. It's much harder for them when they are not the New York Times, when they are not the Washington Post, when they are not the Associated Press, if that makes sense. But in the research that we did, you know, we didn't specifically about that, but we have heard conversations in our group that some are talking about this. I will say, which is probably maybe a little more concerning, is that most have not really been thinking about it. And so then you think about, okay, really that means that most likely their content has already been scraped, it's already being used, will continue to be used unless there's something that kind of overwhelmingly in the industry happens.
Yeah. More questions from people in the audience? Someone want to raise a hand or jump in? Julia, we can come back to you. You had some more questions. Maybe you also want to say something about the comment that you posted about these two things, glaze and nightshade, in terms of image protection.
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't want to hog the airwaves, but if other people haven't got questions,
You're welcome. Go ahead.
yeah, Glaze and Nightshade they've been developed by some guys in somewhere like MIT, one of the big American universities. They're free. There's a bit of a waiting list sometimes, but they're easy to use, and I don't know if they work or not. One has to trust that they do, but their technology actually does look, to me, it looks very believable. They're slow, so it's a bit of a pain, but I've started using it for my few social media posts because I'm really fed up with Meta just stealing everything. There's also, for Andrew, organizations like Pixie, you put your images up there and they will check whether they've been found anywhere else. So that's quite useful because then you can actually take legal action. I can't remember everything else, but if anybody wants to know more, I've got it buried in a Notion page somewhere, and I'm happy to share that later on. Yeah, other questions if we have time. Do we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the big, there are two big questions for me. One is he knows his students are using ChatGPT to write their essays, but he hasn't got a means of proving it. But especially when they don't speak English very well and they're writing in English, and all of a sudden they produce this absolutely perfect document and they know nothing about the content when they speak in class. He was saying, I don't know what to do. I mean, I sent him a whole load of applications that are supposed to detect it, and he said they're already out of date, and that was only a few months ago. So I wonder if people have any suggestions for, we're not going to get students being that transparent, perhaps, in how they're using ChatGPT to write essays. But it's worrying because it makes a mockery of people's MAs and BAs that were done a couple of years ago when people actually had to research. And now it seems that they can just get a massive degree of help in research and writing. Any thoughts?
Well,
sorry, Alex, go on.
No, go ahead, David. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was just going to say, as someone with an academic background who used to set essays and mark them in the pre-generative AI era, yes, well-written essays would stand out dramatically from a lot of students. But I think for me, the burden there is actually on the educational institution and educational practices, that they're not adapting fast enough to this changing environment. And there need to be different forms of assessment. I mean, if you know this is a problem, then it's foolhardy to continue with a form of assessment that allows the problem to proliferate. And I know amongst former colleagues of mine at university, there's a lot of interesting thinking going on about actually how to let students use generative AI, how to use generative AI to set interesting problems and then review things and so on. So I would say, back to the person that you identified, Julia, that it's time to rethink assessment methods rather than look for detection and punishment and so on and so forth, because that's going to be a never-ending arms race, actually. Alex.
In things like Viva instead of, or I don't know if you say Viva or Viva.
Viva, yeah, conversations.
Yeah.
Difficult in the political economy of education because that takes more time and more interaction, and there's less time, and the costs are higher. But there are also ways in which you can actually bring generative AI into courses themselves and then ask people to review things, fact check them, etc., compare things. But I think education itself needs to reflect, and those practices need to change.
I'll be super quick. Sorry, Savannah. I just want to say I'm working with an academic journal right now that is trying to figure out how to incorporate AI and not run away from it, because it is a huge, it's an equity issue too. They were not approving enough people from the global South because of difficulties in writing in English. So it was leveling the playing field and allowing more diverse voices. And even the issues with right now, the review process is quite broken. It takes a very long time. So AI can be used to speed up that process as well. So it's an equity thing. It's getting more research published So agree, David, in incorporating it into lessons and not running away from it.
Yeah, yeah. Shirin, you mentioned in your presentation kind of the problems with detection tools and so on. I wondered if you want to say a little bit more about that and whether you think it's likely there will be any progress in detection tools.
Sure, I just see Savannah's hands. I don't know if you wanna. No.
Yeah, we'll come to the boss next. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of advances in detection technology constantly as generative techniques are progressing, so is detection. It's always run behind. There is also a lot of thinking about how the field is moving to more live protection, because we see a lot of phone calls, Zoom calls, type of threats, and mostly scams, financial scams, and so on. So there is a lot of financial incentives for companies to also step in that space. So that also advances the technology itself, because it's very complex. It requires different speed because you need to be a real-time detection. It's also it require biometric types of detection. But yeah, there are advances. It's still, there is a huge gap, and that's will probably be a case for a long time, since detection cannot be perfect and is not a solution. And we also, I think the problem is that we should not look at that as the solution as well. It's just should be as an indication, as a tool for us to use in the process of investigation, not as the tool, as the result. But yeah, going back to what I said, it just, there is a lot of the gap in accessing to reliable tools, it just not exist. So the way we are working with is really providing access to leading media forensic, but that's not available outside, right? Because it's a research type, it's not accessible outside of like it requires technical skills, or it's not open research, or it's not open company. So there is a lot of issues there for like equity issues. Yeah.
Excellent. Savannah.
Is it okay to squeeze in one more question?
Yes.
Yeah,
We've
no,
got time for this one.
I don't have a very well formulated question, but I was thinking about that idea of transparency, and I was thinking about how it relates to the idea of sort of the more popular understanding of the death of objectivity in journalism, and the subjectivity of the reporting process, and how we're all reporting from our own positionalities. And I guess I was wondering, how does the timing of that, or maybe the increased awareness of the positionality of reporters, sort of play into this idea of transparency, and is there something about that timing with the rise of AI that has made it more complicated? I don't know. It's maybe hypothesizing a bit.
Lynn.
Yeah, I think it definitely, like when you think about trust in news and information, I think it all has kind of collided to kind of hurt the level of trust, if that makes sense. What's interesting though is, and I'm going to share a link to something we call reporter bios. Instead of doing just like a staff bio, we call something, we encourage people to write a reporter bio. And this is something that is more focused on talking about your goals in your reporting. So let's say your beat is education, and what is your goal when you are covering education, right? So you're going to share a couple sentences about like what you are trying to do, and while also sharing a little bit about like maybe yourself and your connection to the beat. And we have actually found that when people are transparent and open about what they are trying to do, so what you are trying to achieve, in saying something like, look, we are trying to make sure that that students in education here is equal for everyone. Like coming out and kind of saying those things can actually help. And one example is there was a reporter who got into covering the criminal justice beat because she had experienced someone in her family who was incarcerated her whole life. And she's like, should I talk about this? And I said, well, first of all, up to you. And let's talk about kind of the pros and cons of doing that, right? There's privacy issues, all the things that can happen when you share things like that online. But based on research, we know that there is a way that you could potentially talk about this and be honest and say, look, I got into this because I saw the coverage of the criminal justice system. It didn't relate to what my experience was with it. So I am trying to make sure to bring some of that and improve that in the coverage that I do. We have found that that kind of transparency, that kind of humility, kind of letting people in a little bit in that can actually be helpful to build trust. So I know I sort of answered your question, but kind of an interesting tidbit there, and I'll share our trust kit on that.
Excellent. Well, that does bring us to the end of our time. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended today, but a special thanks to Alex, to Lynn, to Shirin for 3 fantastic presentations, amongst the best I've seen in these conversations so far. I'm sure 2025 is going to bring a lot more conversation around all these issues, and maybe we'll get everyone back together at some stage. That would be really good. Savannah, thank you to you for putting together today's event, and yeah, we're looking forward to the follow-up. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thank you all very much. Thank you for your contributions. That was brilliant. And just a reminder to everybody attending as well, tomorrow we're starting our final day of the symposium. So we'll be back on Zoom at 10 a.m. GMT. If you're able to join, it would be great to see you there. Thank you all so much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Bye.
Fantastic.
Bye.